Hey Jeff, how are you?
I'm good. How are
Doing good,
you?
man. I'm doing well. So I have with me here Jeff Montoya. For those of you who may have caught a couple of his articles have been published on Tuscan Quill. One is about how what we can learn from bees when it comes to making decisions in a world that's flooded with choices. The other one, which we're going to focus on today, is about solarpunk, this interesting kind of subculture that's sort of emerged. Um, actually, interestingly, recently was talking to somebody else. I don't know if they read your article or not, but they seem to have uh, their own independently developed interest in solarpunk as well. So the idea is out there, and it's probably more popular than I had originally realized. I'd never heard of it until you wrote that article. It's called A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is actually the title of a novel. So you structured it as a book review. The novel is A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is kind of, I guess, sort of an exemplar of the vibe, the ethos, the aesthetic um, of Solarpunk. Has a very interesting plot, very interesting kind of unorthodox sort of approach to character development and all these kinds of things. Um, that was published on our article a while ago, and we thought we could get together today and just kind of discuss this topic of solar punk. What what made you want to write about this book and this genre and this subculture, this ethos? How did you come across the book and how is it why is it so interesting and impactful for you?
Right. So the I came across it. It wasn't really much of a story. It's a book talk. I saw it on a list of like a couple of people I follow their favorite books of the last couple of years, and so I just ended up buying it because I like their opinions. And when I got the physical book, it's actually super cute and tiny, really pretty, good colors. And so I read it almost immediately just because the book was so inviting as the physical object of the book. And the reason I chose to write about it and the genre in general is just because I I don't know, you find something and you just want the world to know about it, you know? Like I feel like I was surprised because the book has been out for a while. It won a Hugo Award, and no one in my circle of friends had ever heard of it. I also struggle to really find much about it except like on book reviewers, like on YouTube and whatnot, but I didn't really see it talked about in other spaces, especially like people who read more intellectual spaces or people who talk about the climate and stuff like that. Places where I thought that this book would have gained popularity by now, even as recently as it was written. Um, so I guess the main motivation was just I want more people to read it. Like I'm desperate for people to see this book because it's one in terms of sci-fi novels. Usually, the main vibe is pessimism about the future or fear or a warning. This is one of the few books where the message was overall optimistic. Um, and while I guess while in the article I didn't really get into story beats too much because I didn't want to spoil anything, mostly because the book is small. It's only 110 pages, 114 pages. You could read it in an afternoon. If you talk too much about it, even casually, you're going to spoil the whole thing. But it ultimately ends up being an optimistic message about our quest for purpose and how difficult that can be, especially in a world that doesn't necessarily need you. Because part of the solar punk genre is optimistic. So take the premise of Utopia, and I don't know about you, but I felt, and I feel other people, we're in a place where, in the current economic situation, where a lot of people aren't doing that well, and money and our income and our annual income is a proxy for our value. It was nice to see a book speak directly to that fear and that insecurity of how valuable am I if I'm not making money, if I don't have an important job, if I'm not a hero, like how do I reconcile that with my understanding of what makes a person valuable? And so I read it and it was just very refreshing to see like the message become an affirmation of the inherent value of being a person that loves things and is loved, and how that is really entirely separate of how you define yourself through your work.
That's interesting. Why don't you explain a little bit your understanding of what Solarpunk is, and we can get into the novel a little bit. Yeah,
Right.
go ahead.
So Solarpunk is still pretty fresh. Like the way I see it, it's a very evolving genre. And the way I see genres, particularly in fiction, is that every piece of art is a response to the culture around you and your influences, your society, your stress. But when you see a lot of the same motifs occur over and over again, and be told the same way, eventually, when there's enough of it, that's a genre. And that's kind of how I see it. With Solarpunk, we'll get into like how I think it fits into the modern world, but the way I saw it is it's the idea of technological advancement that is eco-friendly and very humanist. And the reason like I said, it's a very optimistic message, and Solarpunk is a very optimistic view of futurism. You know, like, yeah, we like technology, we like progress, we like the future, or even as and all it brings. But there is a version of this where the future works with the earth and with the our values as opposed to against it. Um, so that's kind of like how I view Solarpunk, and it started off as a more of an artistic movement, designing landscapes that envisioned cities that were completely different than our modern version of cities of gray and glass and steel. Instead, there were cities that were reimagined as reworking trees to build that they were shaped like houses or furniture or gardens or like I've seen most just look like cities with like roof gardens or using plant life in a way that provides its own infrastructure and utility to what we need in a city while not displacing nature itself. Um, and so from that art movement, you saw some literature, some mostly short stories, and then eventually some more stories that kind of lean toward the idea, mostly uh, like kind of different aspects of utopia in a way. And they all envision advancement in a way that's just very, I don't know, just very like green and eco-friendly and either like using biology or plant life in a way and growing along with nature. And yeah, I kind of does that make sense?
Totally, totally. Yeah, that's kind of what Solarpunk is generally uh, sort of associated with is those kinds of themes.
Mhm.
There's this term that's thrown around a lot now called like the Anthropocene. It's like the new strata in like history, you could say, if you want to think of
Yeah.
it that way. It's like there are different eras, there are different sort of epochs. Okay. I don't know what was there before the Anthropocene, but the Anthropocene is sort of um, the age or the era where like human activity directly impacts the biosphere, something of that nature. So it's like our collective activity as a species has now gotten to the point where it actually directly influences like the larger sort of biospheric ecosystems, which in the past we were just at the mercy of them more or less, and
Mhm.
now we're like influencing them directly. That's kind of the idea. And I guess what you're saying is like solar punk is this thing of like we can enter into that kind of a era, that kind of an epoch in a way that is like symbiotic. And it's in many ways, and it's kind of in the name itself, it's sort of a reaction to the cyberpunk genre, which came before it, which I'm sure you wrote about it in your article as well. Um, where cyberpunk was very dystopian, right? Cyberpunk is like Blade Runner, and The
Mhm.
Matrix, and those kinds of things. And it had its own genre of sci-fi around it, and it was very much like you know, uh, power hungry monopolistic entities will use technology to essentially create these kind of concrete dystopian urban sprawl kind of things, and it was generally a pretty pessimistic, a kind of pessimistic perspective on where technology may be leading us. And Solarpunk, in a way, is a reaction to that. And I agree with you. It's nice that it's not anti-technology. It's trying to figure out what does it look like where we harness technology in a way that's symbiotic with nature. So tell me a little bit about uh, the sort of book itself.
I'll just go through because it's very short, the whole plot, if you don't mind, because it's a lot of it is world building. And the plot kind of becomes to back up, the very first chapter just kind of explains the sci-fi background. And what I like is immediately is a send up of Cyberpunk, where all the robots we've been using for factories and city services, they all gain consciousness in the same day. And now this is the part in Cyberpunk where that becomes a revolt, like Terminator, Matrix, literally, it's always a robot revolt. Cyberpunk and Solarpunk have the same values, they just come at it in different ways. Very like the idea, like almost communist idea of where people should have ownership of the means of production. When the robots take over, it's the means of production having ownership over us. And Song for the Wild built, the humans are so horrified at the fact that they're abusing sentient creatures now that they immediately agree that the robots don't have to do anything. And the robots decide they just want to go in the woods and just live away from human society since they don't know what nature is. They don't understand what they want to know what life is separate from our framework. And that's just the very first chapter. And I just love that's an entire send off of Cyberpunk immediately. Then centuries pass, and it comes back, and they show you that the humans have all coalesced around like particular cities that are very eco-friendly, with only one major hub with its satellites of farmland around it, with little villages. And the main character, a non-binary bunk named Dex, they decide that they want to leave the city, become a tea monk. They become the best tea monk in the city, still don't find value in it. And so they run away to the woods, looking for this monastery, hoping they could find a different story of identifying their purpose. And as they're in the woods trying to escape society, but that's when they run into the robot of the story called Moscap. And Moscap was sent as ambassador from the robots to see what the humans are up to. Are they still alive? And then to find out what do humans need? Because the robots have built their own society, and now that they were advanced enough societally, they wanted to see if humans needed help. Uh, so Dex explains that they want to go to this monastery deeper in the woods. Moscap agrees to go with him in exchange of learning about humanity. And the rest of the book is just a series of conversations these two characters have as they venture deep and deep in the woods. And it's very reminiscent of like really old school philosophy papers that just are two characters talking, like the Oscar Wilde essays, where it's just arguments back and forth over like, what is this? What is that? And what I like about this book is it's funny, it's written really well, but the characters have some depth and personality, and the argument's all in the subtext, where they're trying to figure out each other's value systems. They're trying to figure out like how there's one, like how what where do you detain value from? How do you feel about nature? How do you feel about what? How do you view death? Like what does it mean to end? And is there value in something after it's over? And it's all these like deep but friendly conversations all the way to the end of the book, and that is at its core what it is. Where at the end, the robot convinces Dex that a person's value isn't tied to their purpose. He has a really good line where he explains how robots used to have a purpose when they were slaves, and now they don't, and they're free. Like they're and that you're allowed to just exist, uh, and just enjoy the splendor of being alive. And so I really like that again because like it takes, especially like with our society being particularly capitalistic, we grow up seeing people's value as what job they have and how it relates to us, and how busy you are, how productive you are, the income, do you wear a suit to work? Do you have business cards? All these things are proxies for what we think is the value we assign to a human. And in this society where even if everyone's happy and there's a utopia and it's just self-sustainable, I do like that as a backdrop because like it is that our quest and struggle uh, for self-value and self-respect is a huge part of the human condition.
But that's kind of what I was getting at when I was, I think, saying that it's kind of unorthodox. It's like there's no like arch villain. It seems I haven't read it. I just read your
Yeah,
your
yeah,
your review of it, but there's no like arch villain who's like the archetype of like evil who then has to be
hmm,
overcome, or it's not
yeah,
like that. It's like these like philosophical discourses, these sort of inquiries. It's and I like how you put it in the beginning. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. It's like right at the beginning, it addresses this is probably actually consciously done by the author. Like this is actually where we're going to branch away from cyberpunk at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like the branching off point, the inflection point is when these machines appear to become conscious or sentient, which is I mean, it's something people are talking about now, a little, especially in Silicon Valley. And like you see some people, those conversations are already starting. Um, but at that point, what happens? And it's like the cyberpunk approach is it produces a kind of struggle and conflict of interests between these different factions, and then Solarpunk kind of just diffuses that at the very beginning. It's like, no, 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 like it keep going this way. Now that raises some questions for me in terms of how realistic is that? Like, are the humans just going to give up this like highly productive machinery and go back to like how is their economy going to work if the machines just go away? I don't know if she addresses that in the in the book.
No, no. What I like about her book and the way she addresses it is she just wants to be an optimist, and it's her fiction. She can be an optimist if she wants. I will say, in a way, you bring up that the most far-fetched notion in the book is the idea that humans could be nice in a way that defines society. Because we're talking about the idea of not overworking machines and robots and hypothetical automatons, but we live in a society where we overwork and enslave people. So, like, I do think, in a way, it's like we already know the answer, at least with current trends and current political systems and our current economic systems, which is why I like the world building as well, because it shows you that, like, it is feasible to conceive of a system that doesn't run on exploitation, that doesn't run on the displacement of people and nature and beauty. You know, so yeah, it's off to your point. Like, yeah, that I think, yeah, the craziest part is a society that, when it finds out it's causing harm, decides to stop.
Right. And then, that is and I guess this is where the debate gets kind of heated in many ways, where so just to take the other side of that, or to add a certain nuance to that, like, um, and this is a debate that's been going on for a long time, where it's like nature is not this like forgiving, benevolent thing. It's like when you're just sort of thrown into the state of nature. It's not necessarily the most comfortable, idyllic experience. And so humans for millennia, we've been creating more and more sophisticated tools in order to, in a way, um, handle the difficulties imposed by just like existence within a natural environment. And what you're proposing in this novel is that like when we create the ultimate tool, it's literally like the ultimate tool, you just let it go, which I was very optimistic about human nature. I think that would require probably a very evolved kind of human society to be willing to do that. But if we did do that, and now you have this new kind of species that just goes off into the forest and has to like discover everything from scratch, and then you interface with that species, like the questions you ask, and that it's a very beautiful idea to sort of that she's explored.
It's a very beautifully written story. Like, she has lots of talent. The word choice is excellent. And the people I've recommended to who've read it, they all describe that same moment where you realize you want to read it comfortably. It's a very literally cozy book. Like, I waited for the fall, I think, wrapped myself in a blanket, made tea, and literally, when I realized I was about to finish it, because I was reading on the subway and I realized I was going to finish it, I stopped just so I could create that little nest of comfort and read it. And it's an absolute delight.
Yeah, totally. And it literally is not trying to be an action movie. It's not trying to be like adapted to Hollywood. It's not like
Yeah.
aiming for that, there's no like climax of good versus evil again that it's aiming towards. It's
I've
kind of like
seen,
an unfolding. Yeah.
yeah, I've seen and read reviews where they're much more critical of the fact that if you were to rate it as like just a novel, that on the technical aspects of it, it kind of fails in a lot of places, and that is one of the things, is that the lack of a villain and the lack of a conflict of an imperfect society also means there's real lack of conflict. There's almost no, there's close to zero external conflict in the story. It really is just about a person's insecurity and within the sci-fi world. And so there is, if you're really pedantic and you're really into like the technical, what technically makes a novel good, like the act structure, then there's a chance you won't like it. But I think it is a very unique story, unique experience, and I think it does something that well, I haven't really seen a novel do before, and so that's kind
Yeah,
of like where
totally.
I'm coming from.
Totally, totally. I mean, it's trying to do something different. Like I understand, people can come at it with that kind of critique, but like you're saying, if you were pedantic, if you thought there was like a specific structure to what a novel's supposed to be, then fair enough. But that's not what she's going for. It's not like she tried it and failed at that. She's just trying to do something different. All right. Before we run out of time, I want to shift gears just quickly, just to explore this other theme of like what practical in the world impact do these kinds of stories and vision building, world building kind of things have? I think the themes that Cyberpunk was interested in influenced a lot of sort of engineers and programmers and things of that nature who read that sci-fi and were kind of inspired by it or concerned with like the prognostications that it was making or implying, who then brought those concerns and those values into their work in engineering. So what are some of those themes? Obviously, it's like, you know, like how technology can lead to massive concentrations of power, which then, can be abused to the detriment of both nature, natural environments, but also exacerbating all kinds of wealth inequalities and things like that in society. And I think a big chunk of the sort of cryptographic space, from my loose understanding, was deeply inspired by a lot of these thoughts. And what is cryptography? You sort of come at it as it's a technology that allows me to maintain my independence from these centralized powers that maybe are much more powerful than me otherwise. I think a lot of the original like cryptocurrency space was also very much inspired by this kind of stuff. If you read like some of the old now now it's a totally different kind of ecosystem, but in the early days, I think it was really inspired by a lot of this. Like, can we use cryptography? Can we use technology to maintain the sovereignty of the individual? These were kind of sovereign individual. These kind of ideas were out there. Anyway, that's as a preface. Now you have this new thing that's picking up Solarpunk. So if we say Cyberpunk inspired a certain generation, programmers, engineers, cryptographers, technologists in the 90s and 2000s, uh, how do you think Solarpunk may influence technologists, designers, thinkers, futurists, engineers, entrepreneurs going forward 20 years? Like, what do you have any thoughts? Have you seen anything along those lines that's interested you? Yeah.
I haven't seen anything in front of me yet. I've mostly in the theoretical space and the artistic space. And what I'm hoping will happen, and it depends on the popularity of Solarpunk, but I am seeing more cities look toward ways of making it look less like a modern city, adding more green spaces, adding more parks, but also implementing green space is a way of combating climate change itself, because there's a lot of plants that also are carbon dioxide sinks. So planting more of those, or the fact that they're better at reflecting sunlight. So I've seen places, I think in South America, where they do like a canopy of plants over the street level, so that the sun doesn't bake the streets near their homes. So what I think is it's more you're gonna see it more in the city planning space. Uh, that and in home design. I do think how you saw like cryptographers, or actually, I don't think that's the right term, but the cryptocurrency enthusiasts. You see a lot of that. The lore of it is separating yourself from a centralized system for reasons, being self-independence and libertarian values, or what have you, and that coming from a place of understanding that like concentrations of that you can't trust the system if the system is too centralized. You see that in, I think, the energy space now. Whether or not you want to say it's influenced by solar punk, I think that you're going to see some of the aesthetics of it and some of the vernacular, the wording of people who advertise for energy sustainability and energy independence come from Solarpunk. Uh, I know solar panels aren't invented by Solarpunk, but like the idea of having your home be off the grid, energy from the energy grid, becoming more and more popular, and finding different ways of doing that. So I definitely I think I'm seeing it more like in urban spaces, city planning, and home design is where I believe we'll see it, if at all. But I
Makes
do
sense.
that's kind of where I see it.
Makes sense. No, makes a lot of sense. And now that you bring it up, I think it's really interesting. First of all, and I'm not an expert in this. I don't have the exact data or numbers handy, but I do believe the cost of generating, whatever some standard unit of power, whatever that is, kilowatt of electricity or whatever, from solar panels is now more cost effective than I think certain fossil fuels, if not most fossil fuels. That's something, I'd have to look into to verify, but essentially it's becoming economically competitive, in a very serious way. And what's interesting is I remember not too long, maybe a decade ago or so, I remember people thinking, or it wasn't uncommon for people to think like, oh, solar panels on your roof, that's kind of ugly, you know,
Hmm.
that's like kind of gross, that like it's not aesthetic. And I mean, if you look at some of the imagery and art that's come around, evolved around the solarpunk genre, it's kind of making it look beautiful. It's like making, solar panels look aesthetic, or it's making them fashionable in a way if it catches on. And I think that's um uh you know uh, that definitely will sort of boost its use. I don't know if anybody still today thinks that, solar panels are ugly, but I do remember a long time ago that was a thing that you would hear. Um cool. Maybe last question. I'm going to ask you to grapple with something. This is the last one. This kind of vision building, there's definitely like I think you ended your article very beautifully with this too, where it's like just reading this book and looking at the art around Solarpunk and the world building vision creation around it. It sort of it makes you very sensitive to what's possible, which then also makes you very sensitive to like, oh my God, like this is potential is in our hands. If we squander it, it's like on us, in many ways.
Hmm.
It's like it creates a hope and then also an anxiety. It's like two sides of the same coin. Um, but do you think you mentioned the word utopia a couple of times? Do you think there's anything, do you think there's a danger to utopian vision building?
It's not. I don't think the world building is dangerous. I don't think the artistic space, this where we contemplate what would utopia be, is dangerous in and of itself, particularly in these in art. I actually think that's like partly what art is for, is to give us vision. Um, but on the street, on the practical matter, I would be wary of anybody that promises you utopia. I think it's almost like a heaven. It's more hypothetical than anything. I I believe in it, but I also don't believe in it. It's a north star. It's a guiding compass. It's the world building of a utopia in these spaces and these conversations. I think it really serves as a framework for us to identify what we value, not just in ourselves, but in our societies, like that we are a part of and we are responsible for to a certain extent, even when we feel powerless. Um, so I guess the complicated answer is no. I want to keep talking about utopias because that's the only way we'll ever get closer. But we'll never get there. It's that the path for a better tomorrow is infinite. There will always be a tomorrow, and anybody that promises you a solution tomorrow is a politician or a liar, or both.
Yeah. I like that. It's like it's a North Star. It's something you keep marching towards, but if you become desperate for it, the cures you propose may actually be worse than the disease many times. And I think we've seen
Mm,
that historically. Um, but I like how you say like we should give our artists a certain freedom to explore those things, but the
mhm.
people who are in charge of like practical decision making have to exercise a certain caution and be able to um, well integrate those ideas in a way that's pragmatic. And in that tension, we handle that tension well. Everybody plays their role properly, and we kind of we kind of move roughly in the direction we want to go. Is that fair?
Yeah,
That's
I think
fair.
so.
Cool. I definitely need to read this. I'm really intrigued by it, by the novel, especially how it's this unorthodox structure of just like exploration and discourse, inquiry, as
It's
opposed to
also
like,
it's literally small. You'll read it
yeah,
like in a day, you know?
yeah. No, it's a very beautiful idea. I think we should have more books like that. I think that would be really nice. Maybe Hollywood has influenced our novels a little bit a little bit too much.
Yeah.
It makes you think. Thanks, Jeff. Again, the article is the novel is called A Song for the Wild Built. Jeff wrote a book review on it for us. It's by Becky Chambers. Becky Chambers is the author of the novel. Jeff Montoya is the author of the article. And this has been a discussion on Solarpunk and what it is and what implications it may have. How it's a pretty cool thing that you should check out. So thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.